Welcome back, everyone. We have our third speaker, Shola Akintunde. Shola Akintunde will be presenting the topic repurposing as preservation. And Shola has worked extensively on research and development of sustainable industrial building systems, culminating in being appointed project architect at the 1008 Lagos HOMS Mass Housing Pilot Scheme at Ijora Badia, Lagos. Is currently a trustee and restorations committee lead of Legacy 1995, the Historical and Environmental Interest Group of Nigeria. Beg your pardon. Is currently a trustee and restorations committee lead. During his tenure as president of Legacy 1995, which was the Historical and Environmental Interest Group of Nigeria, which lasted from 2017 to 2019, he led facility management and destination marketing for the restored 122-year-old Jekyll House Railway Mini Museum at Ebute Metta. At Open House Lagos in 2016, he helped establish the first African version of the 46-city open house worldwide network that gives the general public free access to at least 30 best buildings across the whole city. He now primarily serves on the executive committee of the Nigeria chapter of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, as the public relations officer. Through his practice, Shola Akintunde Africa, his life aim is to propagate heritage-based design thinking in West Africa. Shola is the founder trustee of the West African Shared Cultural Heritage Trust. So for the next few minutes, the voice you'll be hearing will be Shola's. I'll just try to get to Shola's slides. I believe Shola is using a mobile device, so I'll try to
yes.
Get his slides out as requested. 1 second.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction, Baba.
Yes, so you can go ahead to just have a feel while I prepare slides for presentation.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Shola Akintunde, as Baba mentioned. Like he said, I've been brought on to talk about the work I've done, I'll say, in the past 10 years since leaving school. And for me, it has been a journey of, finding myself, finding what kind of architecture I'm trying to do, because I was kind of in a catch-22 situation where I came out and I didn't find anything called Nigerian architecture. And then I have this really nice 3Ds that we did in school and we find on the internet, but Nigerian contractors can't build them correctly. So one way or the other, I've been in heritage management, and will I say, from the restoration perspective, the facility management and the destination marketing. But right now, I think I'm trying to get a sense, of mixing all of that together into some kind of architectural work. And my presentation here will try to go over the journey and, try to postulate what I'll be doing going forward. Do you have it up yet? That's it.
Here, I have it.
Oh, yes.
There you are.
Could you help with the full screen thing? I'm not sure if that's that's a Mac. I'm not sure what it is.
No, it is there. It is in here. I just have to remember where to do it. Yes, but I'll look for it if you want to go ahead. Is it not very big right now? Oh, here we go. Full screen mode. There we go.
All right. Sorry. It's a mental thing for me. All right. So the title of this presentation, I tend to talk a lot, so I'm going to try to finish up in 15 minutes. But the title of today's presentation is Repurposing as Preservation. Next slide, please.
Did that come through?
Not yet, no.
Oh, it says sharing is paused. Bring your shared video to the front. Oh, now I'm back.
Okay.
I'm not sure why. Bring your shared window to the front. It is in the front. You can. Let me try this again. All right, I'm gonna stop and restart.
Okay.
It's strange.
Oh, I think
because-
screen
There we
thing.
go. Is that right?
Yes, please. So
Good.
this is the next.
Sorry
I
about
just
that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. I felt it was necessary to lay a premise for, I would say, my thought pattern and the kind of work I get involved in. And for me, one of the strongest, points of reckoning, I would say, in my work is when I experienced something that led me into Googling the language map of Africa. So, Michael, if you could just go to the next slide. And essentially, while the slide is up, I'll just go through the story quickly. I was on some research work, and I think we're in the Republic of Benin, which is the next country after Nigeria, for those who don't know. And we were there for about 3 days, and I was there with a Brazilian professor who teaches in France, an architectural professor, and teaches in France, so he could speak French. And then my other colleague was a Japanese Brazilian who couldn't speak French, but he was able to get around. And throughout the days we were there, the guy who could speak French was the one doing all the talking. He was the one ordering food. He was the one talking to the taxi man, talking to the hotel receptionist, and everything. The second day into the trip, I really felt sad because, this was just my neighboring country. And this was me. They would actually, all the attendees, all the guys attending to us would come to me first, assuming I was, Beninoise. And I would then have to point them, to, pardon my politically incorrect term, but to the white guy. And he would then have to explain, and speak French and say everything. But on the last day, the third day, we were checking out and I was sitting at the reception and we were closing up everything and we were about to leave and the receptionist just beckoned out to the cleaner, the head cleaner, and was like, Shotiba yara. For those who don't understand, that's Yoruba, and that's them saying, oh, have you cleaned up their rooms? And, I froze for a moment because this is me in the neighboring country believing that my language, Yoruba, was stuck in my country and not being able to communicate with people who looked so much like me, people who were part of my country back in the day. And, it really got me thinking, and that led me here. And if you look at the map on the left-hand side, the red is basically bulk of West Africa. And within that, there are different gradations. If you see the Yoruba, from my research, that has been horizontal coastline all along the way up to Sierra Leone and to the ends of West Africa. You find that the languages that are there are actually similar to each other. It's like the way Angelique Kikijo, who's from Republic of Benin, sings in Yoruba, but in a slightly different dialect. But we Nigerians understand her. And because even within ourselves, there are different languages, different dialects of the same language. And you find the same thing happening in the north. Hausa Fulani is something that stretches all the way horizontally. And the next map on the right is the map of the old Oyo Empire, circa 1780. And the red is basically bulk of southwest Nigeria and goes into Dahomey, which is Republic of Benin. And you find these basically countries, pre-colonial countries, before the Berlin Conference of 1854, 1855 happened. And, that really got me thinking that maybe I'm not really Nigerian in a sense. I'm more West African. And sorry, if you go to the next slide, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And it just started, got me thinking about why there's so much discussion about diversity within Africa, because what has been happening is that we were caught across fault lines. We were not, separated according to our cultures, in which case other countries were, but we've just been caught up, I would say like cake, And, my first point here, drawing from the premise, is that language assimilation has kind of separated people who normally are one, in the sense of the Tower of Babel effect. Just put Nigeria and put two slices, no offense, two slices of Togo and Republic of Benin before Ghana, the other Anglophone country. And, these countries are never going to be able to relate or cooperate or work with each other in any way or form. And, the fact that, I have local languages that span or are similar to the languages of the future countries, that helps me better understand the kind of heritage work I want to be doing. The next point is trans-border cultural fluidity, which goes on to say, we're basically one in a horizontal fashion. I was in Ghana in 2017 for Charlie Water, and, Jamestown that Kukuma mentioned earlier was, the site of all of that. And just walking around, I was all smiles because it felt exactly like what Lagos Island feels like. And they're both coastal areas because people just have their shops downstairs, they live upstairs, and in a whim, on Friday night, they just bring out canopies, bring out chairs, and block off the streets and have parties all night. And I saw this same exact culture 4 countries away. And, going to a bit to the north as well for some research, and finding that, the border to Republic of Benin in the north, it's so fluid, that people many times don't even differentiate who is Nigerian, who's Beninois. And all along the way, I've seen TV interviews where you're talking to people in Mali and they're speaking Hausa. I don't understand fully the language, but I recognize the words and things like that. And the last point is climatic. No, go on.
Yeah.
The last point is climatic culture, which, in doing all that mapping research, I also then looked at the climatic map of Africa, and kind of found that there was if you overlay them on each other, there's kind of an interplay between culture, between language and geography. Because you find that the Hausa Fulani people stay around the semi-arid regions, and the Yoruba people, the Yoruba-esque people, are more along the coastal lines, places with rivers, places with water bodies, fountains and things like that. And, that really got me, it just got me puzzled, and it really forms the kind of work I'm trying to do. So, but we're here to talk about buildings. I just felt to put that out there, and so we could go ahead. Going back to the first topic, which is repurposing as preservation, I felt to add as decolonization, because that brings up the notion of, I think is a broad discussion right now. And, I'm just trying to come up with my own idea based on my work. For me, it is that taking ownership of what was taken from you. Michael, if you go to the next slide, I think there's some explanations there of what I'm trying to do. So why preserve? Because our identity depends on it. Identity is used a lot nowadays, but my easiest way to say it is identity is like your surname, is what makes you unique. Like if I look at the chat now, maybe the number of people called Michael, the number of people called Biola, BC, but the surname is what says, oh, that's BC Olumide, and that's the other BC. And basically it's what separates you or what makes you different from others or what makes you identifiable. So that speaks to the fact that upon leaving architecture school after 6 years of madness, I did not know what kind of architecture was Nigerian architecture. And, I may say that the only example I had was the work of Demas Nwoko, and that's another whole topic for another day. And then the next point about why preserve is because right now, the oldest buildings are the best built. I say that everywhere to all the architects I know. None of the buildings less than the mid-70s are better than the ones before that. The lines are straight, the plastering is accurate, the staircase is not wobbled. when an architect draws with straight edges, the building actually comes out with straight edges, not in anything in the last 40 years. And, you know, that is me putting it out there. I see some of my lecturers in the room, so maybe they want to reprimand me later. But the next point is because we need to recover our craftsmanship, building materials, construction methods. Like Baba said, you know, they're doing a lot of work in trying to document the pre-colonial architectural heritage of Nigeria. There is nothing out there. And like the work Kukuma is doing, you know, even the work that they're going to be documenting is going to be at the point where documentation came into place. You know, we just had master builders and people who were known for that, and they just went around moving into communities that needed construction work, and they just did the whole thing. And so the working structure was different, all kinds of things were different. The materials, you know, clay, I put it out there again, is still the best construction material in the world in terms of all the new talk of green infrastructure, sustainability, and all of that, thermal conductivity. Everything about clay says it is the best thing for the climate of Africa, or of West Africa, let me say. Also, the next point, because our identity depends on it, same reason why we decolonize. And the next point, because we need to clarify what is ours and what is not. That just points out the fact that I think there's a lot of fluidity now in what is African architecture in terms of heritage now, because in Nigeria, for example, we have Afro-Brazilian buildings, and a lot of people are looking to that as the beginning of architectural heritage in, I would say, West Africa. And that's nice, you know, because it's a nice story to say people were taken out, came back with skills and created this new form, but that was not the beginning of construction in Africa. So we need to kind of be better understand what separates African architecture, you know, pre-colonial African architecture, purely African architecture, from what came after we had been, I would say, colonized. Next point, because we need to decode what to sell and what to buy. You know, I think after the second point, what comes next is, you know, what to export, basically what to say, okay, you know what, this has worked for us, so maybe you guys want to try this out, and to know, okay, we don't have this sorted out yet, maybe you want to bring it here, because for example, the way air conditioning is now like a prerequisite for construction in tropical West Africa, you know, it's funny because one, we don't have the infrastructure to sustain that, and two, you know, the air that comes, cold air is not necessarily the best for the humid climate. The last point is because we need to rebuild our pre-colonial monuments. I feel that, you know, there are things that we've lost, like I said on the left, craftsmanship, building materials, construction methods that are best suited for our environment, for our climate, for our geography, and we need to find a way to eventually get back to that. I think that speaks to what Hollywood is trying to do with Wakanda, to imagine what Africa would have been without colonization. And it's for now an imagination, but hopefully maybe after 2 generations, after mine, maybe we'll find out. Next slide, please, Michael. So I just want to quickly run through 5 projects that I've been involved in different capacities. The first one is Jekyll House, built 1898, was the house of the general manager of the Nigerian Railway Corporation. And it was one of the first major infrastructure things that the British did in Nigeria, basically to connect Nigeria to itself, but also to bring goods to the ports and ship them out. The old running shed is where steam engines used to be repaired. And just to give a broader background to how I'm doing all this railway work, like Baba said, I've been involved in Legacy 1995, who currently has a joint venture program with the Nigerian Railway Corporation. And that was started in 1998 when the railways was becoming 100 years. And so for them, Legacy doing all this restoration work from 95, tours and all of that, was a good fit to come up with a plan for all of this real heritage infrastructure to be promoted, to be propagated, to be conserved. And so we've been doing that, or been trying to do that for some time. So that speaks to the first two. Vaughan House is the house of one of the descendants of Scipio Vaughan. He's the only documented returnee slave from America, from South Carolina, and he has moved. He moved to Nigeria. He made his. His grandfather made him promise that he was going to move back to Africa, and his grandfather told him he's from Yoruba land. That's what he was called then, and gave him a bit of background. And he found his way. You know, he was able to find his way back to Lagos, eventually to Lagos, from Sierra Leone, Freetown, back to Lagos, and built a family. And the Vaughan family are kind of a well-known family in Lagos now. Onikon House is a house that was built in 1939 by a Nigerian. Palais de Lomé is an example from Togo of a colonial palace that has been repurposed into an arts and cultural center. I think I'm going to try to move a bit faster now. Michael, if you could just go to the next slide. So Jekyll House, just a brief rundown. Like I said, it was commissioned by the British colonial government, built by Nigerians. By built, I mean, who did the hard labor, you know, who put the brick and mortar together, you know, who did the carpentry and all of that. At the bottom, it says repurposing date. The new purpose is to be a museum. And if you look at the dates of the original building and the date it was repurposed, that's exactly about, I think, 110 years, is that? And that says a lot, you know, because basically that's 50 years on either side of independence, and it's that it has taken us this long to even make an effort. But if you go further down, at the last line here, it was, most of the work was funded by British Gas. You know, so there's also the fact that this is a British heritage and British resources are being put to restore a British building, but on Nigerian land. So that brings up the discussion, you know, which I'll get into later, about ownership and about how we can use programming and, you know, repurposing to kind of re-understand these buildings and kind of engage with them in a different way that is more contextual to us. Next slide, please. So this is Jekyll House before and after restoration. One thing I'd just like to point out, if you notice on the picture on the left, on the right-hand side of it, there's like a staircase that comes from, you know, the master bedroom upstairs, downstairs. And we kind of had to take that out because it didn't fit the purpose. But essentially, a lot of work was done in trying to understand the kind of craftsmanship that was done here. Thankfully, we had Professor John Godwin, who was my lecturer at the time, who led the process. And him, from his days growing up with his father, who was also a master builder, an architect, you know, understood better some of the joinery work and all of that, which we no longer had in Nigeria. You know, that's something, you know, we've lost. Like, typically, you know, even the architects in the room that work in Nigeria know, even for tiling, you have to bring workers from Togo or from Republic of Benin, because Nigerians are no more interested in those kinds of things because there's no economy in it. Next slide, please, Michael. No, you have to go back one. Okay, so this is just a quick, yes, this one. So this is a quick glance at the kind of things that was done. Stripping out bad timber and replacing it. In the middle on the top, middle top picture shows where, you know, a copper, will I say, joint is being used to strengthen a timber joint. And basically that is us trying to, like, it's kind of like the surgery where they put a steel rod in your knee because your bones are weak. This is us, but retaining the architecture of the building. And so things like this were done, and it was a good education for those of us who were students at the time to know that these are the kinds of things that one can do to conserve a heritage site without it losing its architectural language. Bottom middle picture is a funny picture where we kind of brought, I would say, British laborers this time instead of the Nigerian laborers who did the building. We had some volunteers who were working in Nigeria at the time, and they helped us with landscaping. So it was a nice way to see how British people were involved in the dirty work of, you know, building this Nigerian building. And the top right corner, I'm not sure, for me, Baba's picture is blocking it, but the top right corner is a picture of the servants' quarters, where probably the African would have been living there and you know, serving the master. And, you know, we've turned it into the toilets now. And there's a nice, you know, painting on there that creates this ambience at the back. And we've done the landscaping to create something called Jekyll's Secret Garden. By the way, it's named after Francis Jekyll, who wrote, you know, 3 volumes of Nigerian railway history. So we felt to immortalize him that way. Next slide, please, Michael. The next slide shows how we've been able to engage with it. One of the first things we did was with Jameson, the Irish whiskey brand, and, you know, which is over 100 years old as well. And it was nice to see how this old brand and this old building came together. And you find young people who wouldn't typically come to this part of town, because Ebute Metta is on the mainland, and, you know, people, you know, who spend all their time in the main city center of Lagos came all the way to this, you know, abandoned railway compound to engage with this space. And, you know, it was the beginning of a good thing, because we kind of take pride in the fact that Jameson is now a really, you know, notable brand in Nigeria. But this time in 2016, this was their first event. But now the events are overbooked and everything. And on the right is a food festival we hosted. So, you know, that brings up the conversation of, you know, how did a residence, you know, that usually would be just pristine lawn, big house, you know, maybe a few garden parties once in a while, became, you know, this new event space that young people in Lagos were engaging with, and we're happy to see, because there's little green urban space in a city as mad and as dense as Lagos. The bottom left screen is a point where we collaborated with the Alliance Française, and we showed some French movies, and people were in the picnic. And honestly, at this time, there was nothing like this in Lagos. There are a few places now, but, you know, it was a breath of fresh air, because somewhere that was an abandoned, empty site became a breath of fresh air, a new place for people to go to and engage with. Next slide, please, Michael. The old running shed, like I said, is the where the steam engines used to be repaired. So it was also built in 1898. Sorry, there's a mistake there. I called it a residence. But the repurposing, we've kind of named it the site for the main museum, where we'll have larger exhibits and, you know, steam engines and parts and things like that. But what we've not been able to raise the resources to restore it. We've just been able to kind of host, I would say, exploratory events and engagements in it. So if you go to the next slide, please, Michael. I have a rundown. At a glance, I don't know how clear this picture is on your end, but on the left is what it looks like, and it still looks like that. But on the right is this really nice She Leads Africa event. It's a festival that we hosted. And you can see the building, you know, on the picture on the right, but on the left-hand side of it, the torn down roof, the worn out environment, but it was still a good engagement point. So thinking about the juxtaposition of this, basically a factory, you know, a repair yard, and an event space where people were coming to celebrate female ingenuity and tech and all kinds of things was going on there side by side. And it was a good time. People had a good time. Next slide, please, Michael. The next slide also shows, you know, the events, the same event on the left. You know, there were all kinds of commercial activities. There was a place where they were doing free hairdressing for women. And in the middle here, we have pictures from some work we did with students from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, where, you know, in 2017, they came and kind of spent 2 weeks, you know, just studying the whole site and engaging with this space and coming up with artistic interventions, you know, to see, you know, how people interacted with art. Basically, it was a restoration site, but also an art gallery. And that was very interesting for us to see, because all of this goes together into our research into what will be done with the space eventually. On the right-hand side is us hosting Jameson again for the second time. And this time it was a full-on concert. On the bottom picture, they used one of the trains and they called it a food train. And vendors were sitting in the trains serving barbecue and all sorts of things to people on the outside. And that was a nice way to repurpose, derelict, abandoned trains. But, those are the kinds of things we've been doing in terms of repurposing these things and using them in a different way that was more contextual to now. Next slide, please, Michael. Vaughan House. This is the one I said was built, in this case, I would say by an American African. A juxtaposition of the word African-American that we're used to, because these were Americans, I would say Africans gone to America, but came back to Africa, and in this case, he used local builders. At that time, around 1900, it must have been the Afro-Brazilian craftsmen. And going down to the bottom of this page, the current owner now runs a printing business, and he has some equipment there, on the ground floor, and has his corporate office upstairs. And right now, what he's been doing, if you go to the next slide, please, Michael, is apart from restoring the building, okay, these are just pictures of before and after. Next slide, please, Michael. So apart from the original existing building, he's put so much money into building, if you look at the pictures in the middle, top and bottom, a new building that kind of mimics the original building. There was a smaller building there, but it wasn't this grand. And so he's built this thing that is kind of like a mixture of Yoruba, I would say Yoruba art, sculpturing on the front facade in the top picture, in the front facade in the kind of triangular top of the eaves of the roof. And then, it's such a huge space that he said he wants to kind of host like artistic engagements and intellectual discourses, almost like a research center workspace. And all of this is in the heart of Lagos Island. The Nigerians here know how mad that place is. If you look at the pictures here, the pictures on the bottom left and the picture on the top right, those are pictures showing the high-rise buildings of 30 floors and so many floors all around this building, kind of looking down and saying, we're going to come for this site. There's such a huge space that we need to put something up in. And this guy has spent so much money to kind of keep this vibe. And, he's one in a million, but, these are the kinds of things that people are trying to do, and it's just really interesting to see. Next slide, please, Michael. So this is Onikon House, which was coincidentally built by someone who used to work in the Nigerian Railway Corporation. And in the mid-30s, he applied for a loan, to build this house. There was a housing scheme for African staff, and they could get loans to build their own house. And at this point, this guy built his house in Onikon, which was like, the highbrow area of the time. And it was built by Afro-Brazilian Afro-Brazilian construction firm. But by 2019, which is about 80 years later, right now a tourism company has bought up the site. If you go to the next slide, please, Michael. This is the picture on the left of what it originally was, and now they've done some minor modifications to it. If you look at the picture on the left, it's a duplex in front. Then at the back of it, if you can faintly see like a roof terrace, of a ground floor building, and a roof terrace where they could have open air parties and things like that, which is typical of Yoruba culture. But right now, what has been done is that roof terrace has been converted into, will I say, a double two levels of a library and a mezzanine floor of like a reading area. So if you go to the next slide, please, Michael. So on the top right-hand corner is something that has been done where steel supports were kind of introduced to the back of the building to carry this new floor, and then an attic, and that shows the staircase that takes you to this small alcove in the roof where you can sit and read some books. And another interesting feature I like is somewhere in the site, he built this false wall. At the bottom right, you can see a false wall that kind of shows the facade of a typical Afro-Brazilian building with a door and a window that acts as a stage for, outdoor events, small outdoor events, or people just hanging out. And right now, it also serves as a selfie wall. People just go there to take pictures. Oh, they're in an old building. So on the bottom left are just things, that the tourism company is doing. They've acquired the buses registered as local public transportation. Everybody knows the yellow and black of Lagos. But now they use it for tour services. So people come to Onikon House and they get into a keke, a small number, or get into a bus that has this central seating, and they give you a tour of Lagos in this, customized public transport system. And this is what this person has done with this building and made it very relevant to now. If you go to the next slide, please, Michael. These are events we've held in there. On the left, kind of shows the interior. There's a nice, fully kitted gallery of the history of Lagos. At the bottom, they have small audiovisual rooms for seminars, which brings the economics into this. By renting out these spaces, they're able to raise the funds to help maintain this building, because most times, typically heritage sites and restoration and preservation is more expensive, and more cost intensive than actually building a new building, that probably wouldn't last as long, but, it's kind of easier to maintain. And of course, in the middle, we've hosted film screenings of historical movies. At the bottom are students who came to kind of watch. So there's an educational component in this, especially in collaboration with the library space in the attic, that I showed earlier. And on the right, are the two scenarios where the false wall is being used. Just at the false wall is kind of the end of the security, the security, I would say security man's room / office. And this false wall has just been put there, and it kind of gives the space character, because on the top right is where, people pose in these Yoruba costumes and take pictures with that backdrop. And at the bottom is a singer staying in the same space, and people are sitting down listening to her. And, basically the use of this space has been turned on his head, but made really, really relevant for now. Next slide, please, Michael. Okay, so the last slide is Palais de Lome, which is a really, really fascinating project. I'm very, okay, my time is up. I think this is the last slide, so I'm very jealous of this project. If you could just go to the next slide, Michael, and kind of spend 2 minutes, then go. So this is the Colonial Palace. This is the Colonial Palace of Togo, built by the Germans. And recently, within the last 5 years, from last year, the Togolese government actually put down the resources to restore this building and convert it into an arts and cultural center. If we can just go quickly to the next slide, Michael. So it was really located towards with a marina facing the Atlantic Ocean, and it's kind of similar to what we have in Lagos, but it's just that we're not patient enough. We've built 3 lanes of roads, highway, car park, bridges, and we've blocked off the scenery, but right now, the people of Togo have taken ownership of this huge colonial fortress, that they probably never had access to. And it's free, open access for students, for people to come and engage with this space. I think I'll just run through the next few slides. This shows some of the work that was done, befores and afters. Next slide, please, Michael. The opening day, there was a lot of exhibitions. And just to speak to the West African connection, anytime anybody is creating some work on pre-colonial heritage of Africa or West Africa, you find that they cross borders. So in this exhibition, I found things about Ife culture, about the Oyo Empire, about Benin culture, and all those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So we preserve to take full ownership of previously inaccessible land. Many of these buildings I just showed, typical Nigerians couldn't go to those sites. They either, had to go there barefoot, or they either had to, be stuck. They either had to be staff, working at the space, and then to retrace our steps to the quality of life and craftsmanship. Because of the steps taken with colonialism, we can't just jump back and say we want to start building mud houses. We kind of have to go back, retrace the steps, and create a new identity in terms of construction, in terms of cultural expression, and in other broad areas. And on the right, to convert tools of oppression into contraptions, I call it, of happiness. So basically, you see how people have come to have fun in places that their great-grandparents, couldn't have access to, or were afraid to go into, or, were just oppressed in general. The second point, to develop updated building materials. I think I've spoken about that in the previous point. A new way of building that suits Africa, that suits our climate. And the last point is to recreate the real African identity. I'll just give an example of that. 20 years ago, I was listening to only American music, but now, Afrobeats has gone haywire. Same thing with Nollywood. Before, there was nothing called Nigerian music internationally, but now it exists. So I'm hoping that in a few years, or maybe a decade from now, there'll be African architecture, Nigerian architecture, West African architecture. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Shola. This was, I like the fact that you're attacking preservation, conservation at the level of the building, like at the level of arresting what already exists, and in a very gung-ho sort of Nigerian way. So I think we should take comments, questions quickly. We have very short time left. So I think we already have questions. So Shola, can you see the comments, or do I have to read it out to you?
Can see them, but I don't mind if you help with them, please.
Okay, Renoir Tsueli, just sorry if I not his name. It says, thank you so much, Shola. Your work is phenomenal. Seems as though a number of the projects have been championed by private enterprise and clients. To what extent have you had success or otherwise in this historic preservation / decolonization project through, I believe, government collaboration in Nigeria? How much success have you had in through government?
Well, my best example of that, an organizational framework, a sustainable organizational framework, is our work in the railway compound. So like I said, when they became 100 years and with our advocacy involved, they came and, we got them to a point, over a few years, we got them to a point where they agreed to set up a joint committee that was position-based. So the top management staff of the Lagos district and the top management staff of, or executives of Legacy, which is a non-profit organization, a heritage advocacy institution, came together, and the corporation kind of handed over 4 sites to them, to that committee in perpetuity. So basically, what that does is, first of all, gives you a tenure that gives you the confidence and gives you the, resources to be able to speak to potential funders and supporters. And then the community in this case, which is staff and people living in the railway compound, were able to contribute as well. Because one of the social impacts we've been able to achieve is that, for example, retirees, once they're done with working in railways, as everybody knows, in Nigeria, there's nothing for retirees. You just retire and maybe go to a farm. But we've had retirees from the public relations department, engineering department, who came and spent their first few years, kind of like a soft landing, volunteering at the museum and kind of contributing their knowledge, because they've had 30, 35 years of this backlog. So I would say that for government collaboration, it's madness, and just as Kukuma said as well, but once, you're obstinate to an extent and you seem to know what you're doing, you can get what you want. And of course, there's a lot of politics, but once you're able to get it, ask for a long-term plan and make sure that once they give you that, you are able to deliver. I think it's something we actually continue the stakeholder management to this day, but, Kukua, sorry, not Kukuma, Kukua. So I think it's possible, but of course it's a lot of work, but I think the work I've shown kind of shows that it's possible, but it's a delicate matter, but I really think it's possible. And just also add, the reason why I think I'm also interested in doing West African work is because I get to be able to tell Nigerian government officials that, look at Togo. No offense, but look at small Togo doing these things that, big Nigeria can't do. Our colonial palace is just sitting there, handed from the federal government to the state government recently, and nothing is being done. But look at Togo with this big, beautiful arts and cultural center, and just flourishing. So you have to almost tell government to their face that, you guys are just not doing anything. So it's difficult, but it's possible. That's the short answer.
If I can interrupt just for a second, I'm getting a lot of messages from people that say they have to leave. We certainly understand we're a little bit over time, but we are going to continue on with more questions and some discussion. But if you have to leave, by all means, this is recorded, and we'll make sure that everyone has access to the recording. Thanks.
Thank you. Shala, you have another question from, I believe, Adedoyin Teriba. Says, Shala, thank you for your presentation. He says, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. While the projects preserve the forms of the building, which is the original usages of the buildings and their histories have been lost, or Adedoyin Teriba, please, could you ask this question in person? Maybe it will
Yes.
cut across better. Thank you.
Yes. So Shola, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I was a member of Legacy in 1995 in the early 2000s. I grew up on the University of Lagos campus, so I even wrote a dissertation on Afro-Brazilian architecture. So I come to this just by way of the other people listening to this, I come to this with some background. And so I want to just throw this at you. This is, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. And the question is this, with the wonderful work that you're doing, my sense is that the original usages of the projects that you showed are being lost. In other words, with whether it's Jekyll House that you showed or Onikon House that's been turned into a museum, the original usages of those buildings are no more. They have been repurposed in your language. And so the question is, and please respond, even though the buildings are being preserved per se, are the histories of the buildings being preserved? So that's the question. And so the reason why I'm asking this question is to pose a greater, perhaps thing that we should think about whether adaptive reuse preserves histories or whether histories are lost as a result of adaptive reuse. So this is the question that I'm throwing to you, and please respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So you are quite right. That is like a total, symposium on its own. But to kind of just speak on my experience with these buildings. For example, Jekyll House, like we said, is a museum. And so all of the documentation that we found in the building, some of the things that we replaced in the building are part of the content that makes up the collections of the museum. And so the stories about how Jekyll House and the other first 21 residential buildings were built is documented, and it's on display at Jekyll House, a revolving display. And like I mentioned, it's named after somebody who actually documented this heritage, Francis Jekyll. He did 3 volumes of Nigerian railway history. So even though we're repurposing, the reason we're repurposing is to increase engagement or to contextualize the work, but the content in itself now forms part of the new engagement. To give another example, Onikon House, once you come in the entrance foyer, what you have is a picture of the man who built the house, Olumide Holloway, and his family history, the original pictures of his house, the family portraits, all those things. So it has now formed part of the engagement in the repurposing. So we're not just discarding, but we're saying, let's make this relatable. Let's make this interesting for now. Because, if it's just a residence, some of these buildings can't be sustained as residences in these areas anymore. You just can't have a small house in Lagos Island. And, how much is the land use charge? Because there are commercial towers all around there. How much is your water? How much are your services? It's just not sustainable anymore. And so, while being sensitive, is necessary to repurpose, but also being sensitive, to the previous use and the heritage. So I hope that answers your question in a way, but I'm open for further discussion on that. And thank you very much.
Sure. I guess the bigger question is, should Africa be preserved vis-a-vis issues like poverty? And I remember reading an article by, I think, the blog failedarchitecture.com, and it was saying about how today, because some or many buildings are listed in London, how London is becoming a museum, and how are we, in a sense, preserving for the sake of preservation, or but I guess that's something for another academic debate sometime in the future. We're getting questions in quick succession, and we have to close soon. So what we will do is, I believe, take 2 more questions that we find to be maybe one. We'll just take two more questions. There's one question here from Homtoluwase Olide. This is a great presentation, Shola. You have discussed the duality of heritage, duality of heritage in West Africa regarding language, culture, and colonial buildings. How do you see Afro-Brazilian buildings? Do you see them as a political resource that further illuminates this concept between Africa and the wider diaspora? Is that how you see the Afro-Brazilian buildings, as a political resource? Shola, you're muted. I think your mic is muted.
Do you want to go over the questions? I just answer them at the end, or should I just take them one by one?
Just take them. We'll take the next one, but the last, I believe. Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for your question, Ohuntoluwase. Definitely, Afro-Brazilian. The whole Afro-Brazilian movement is a major milestone in all aspects of West African culture, because I would say they were the beginning of, what is the new or the current African civilization, because these were people who found their way back to their homes and tried to create a new life for themselves with the skills that I would say they were forced to learn. And so you find, there are all kinds of, there's a particular book, that's written in both English and Portuguese. I think the title is From Slave Quarters to Townhouses. I can't remember the name of the author anymore, but they're a couple. And it just basically talks about how these people kind of took, the painful past and created a brighter future. And it's kind of similar to the story of Scipio Vaughan, who kind of, from being a freed American slave, made his family come back to Africa, or encouraged them to come back, and they did, and they became part of the elite of the time. So without a doubt, Afro-Brazilian architecture birthed what we currently have as a construction industry, in terms of design, in terms of construction, craftsmanship, carpentry, ironmongery, everything, and that is the beginning of the conversation. But I'm just saying, that comes after colonization, and there's a even bigger discussion to be had pre-colonially, and we've lost that. There's just nothing out there in terms of pre-colonial architectural cultural heritage in general. So definitely the politics is useful, but the goal is pre-colonial heritage. I hope that answers your question. Right.
Thanks, Shola. I must say that Ontoluwase is one of the applicants for the A3 ACNET Prize, And she has been working on, she's been very invested and interested in how to make documentation sit more sustainably at the level of policy. And I think one of the things she highlighted last week in our workshop was how rather than take one building as a high-risk structure, take the whole district, Afro-Brazilian heritage as a district, as a kind of maybe bargaining chip when it comes to policy framework, agenda setting and stuff like that, along that alley. So I'll take one last question. I'm struggling which one to really take now. Okay. You know what? We need another workshop for Shola. So I think we'll just, I've seen a question we'll just take into the next thing I'm supposed to. Michael, do you mind quickly showing what I was going to talk about? Just to close, yes, it helped if you could share the screen.
That's good. So
I think the first one, the A3 something Baba presentation.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so
yes, and that would answer one of the questions of, I think, Tolu. So we'll just because in terms of all of this, I think something I and Shola had said, I mean, we discussed privately was there's a risk, especially on the continent with social media, that this becomes another buzzword. This becomes another fad, you know, archiving and documentation and all that stuff. But while it's also good, it becomes a fad, which is a good thing. We're more interested in how it can become a long-term, maybe cultural, something that also is sustainable at the level of students imbibing a culture of documenting. I think next slide, Michael.
The next page?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, the next page.
Baba, if I could just something to that,
yes.
just brief. She mentioned, Tolu mentioned something about private institutions. Just to add, for example, that in the presentation I had mentioned, I think I forgot to mention that Palais de Lomé, you know, which was funded by the Togolese government, you know, the director actually made sure that up to 10 small and medium scale firms, you know, multidisciplinary, coming from arts, engineering, architecture, were involved in that national project. And, you know, so that was a good way for capacity building. And one believes or one hopes that those skills are then transferred into other, maybe smaller projects. And also to add that yesterday, you know, coincidentally, Legacy, we hosted a webinar just like this with the Nigerian Institute of Architects, you know, Lagos chapter, you know, so people are getting more interested, but just like you also alluded to, we hope it's not just an interest, we hope it will materialize into actual, you know, documentation, archival, and restoration, you know, repurposing projects, you know, so yeah, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shola. So just to wrap, we've had we've had, from all the comments, of course, we've had enlightening conversation or enlightening talks from Raj Issa, who's not here anymore, from Kukuwa Manfo, and from Shola Akitside, with different angles to, or different approaches to documenting or preserving cultural heritage. Something that I think has been touched on, I'll just go forward. Michael, just the next slide, I think is the last thing for today, is that we started something on the A3 Outlet Collaborative. One of the workshops we had prelude to this was a high-risk workshop where we began to, with the participants or applicants of the prize, began to spotlight structures, buildings, sites that we felt were on the edge of something. So on the edge of reconstruction, redevelopment, some facelifts, whatever name it's called, and all of that. One thing we looked at in the last discussion we had with the applicants was a lot of because some of the work really, and I like that Shola's presentation kind of has driven that home. The work starts usually from an architect's office, right? So why don't we take the process, the very thin called document, why don't we start surgically maybe at the level of the practice? And so we're looking at documenting from that level. Now it's not, I mean, it's, I remember offering to write for architects for nothing for 3 years. And I mean, no architect was going to, in Lagos, basically. And, you know, architects were maybe either too busy or maybe didn't see it as something so important. And many works that, for instance, many buildings currently being built, maybe of cultural importance or of no cultural importance, just get finished and then we don't have any sort of documentation. So aside our collaboration with universities, which we think is very key, where we're trying to get to the very root of, from the students, the 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 20-year-olds who are in universities who need to learn or begin to know that their work also deserves or needs to be documented. It's also important to go to the practices. So we want to begin to bring maybe the candidates that we have on our A3 ArcNet who've written, and of course, anyone who's interested in this sort of idea of an ecosystem, to have a conversation or to have a round table with practices. And we're planning that this doesn't end. We plan to have something on September 4. I think it should be a Friday. And we're trying to spotlight, especially the building the picture, which I think is of national interest at the moment. And one of our applicants, candidates, had written or had, discussed this building in her presentation in our high-risk workshop, which is, this building is currently, of course, in a lot of contention in Nigeria. It's the National Theatre Lagos. It's a lot of cultural importance, of course. I mean, it was built to commemorate or to host, rather, the Festival of Arts and Culture, which was the second at the time in 1977. And of course, there's contentious issue around the design being lifted from Bulgaria. There's contention around the cost and continual renovation. And now there is contention about, I think, the transfer of ownership of the property and then the very looming reconstruction or expansion, whatever buzzwords are in the papers, mainstream papers now, on this building. So we will be tentatively hosting on September 4, 2020, another sort of workshop, basically using this building as a kind of frame. We also have plans for the rest of the year. There should be, we had planned to have in-person workshops, of course, in Lagos and in Boston, so that we begin this digital documentation project. But of course, that will still, for the foreseeable future, that might just be next year because of travel restrictions. We also plan a teacher workshop. I mean, because, I mean, one of the things we discovered receiving entries from different parts of the world, we received entry from people at PhD level. And so, I mean, being stunned with that, we realized that, I mean, as a PhD candidates who had written to us of a building that that where he used a lot of vocabulary, Yoruba vocabulary, which is not maybe recognized globally. And so it becomes important that also teachers of history of architecture who can begin to develop or begin to tinker with a framework for how a vocabulary can become maybe mainstream about African the different regional architectures rather of in Africa can become mainstream. So at the level of language, at the level of vocabulary, of lexicon, it's important that we also begin to look at that, you know, again, I'll say at that, you know, very surgical level of naming what these terms can be so that archival and documentation projects can happen. So those are some of the plans that we have, I believe, for tentatively before the year runs out. We've again been trying to push this in spite of COVID-19 restrictions, and we're so grateful for everyone attending. Again, like Dr. Tola said, we're going to have the recording available on a platform. Of course, you can request it and we'll send it to you. But otherwise, this was a very, very enlightening conversation. We want to thank all our speakers, from Raj to Kukua to Shola. And I believe you can also text the speakers privately. Is that possible, Michael? And
Yes.
then, the
Yep,
further
there's-
conversation I believe, can happen from there. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I just I want to thank you for putting this group together. These were absolutely fascinating presentations. Thank you to each of you who spoke. I think there's, it's really gratifying to hear about all of the work that is being done and to have play some small part, which I think is ArcNet's big role in bringing that to a big audience, a worldwide audience. Your last comments made me think about, we're working right now on ArcNet's pedagogy project, which is developing materials for teaching and learning. And I think that's something we should really look at, is how do we teach about this architecture? So yeah, that's really all I have to say right now. But thank you so much for putting this together. This was a great group.
Yeah, thank you to you as well.
Yeah.
So, otherwise, I guess we'll call it a night. I'm from Lagos anyway, and happy Salah to all the Muslim folks also in the room.
Yes, Eid Mubarak
Yes.
too.
Yes, from Morocco.